Strange how dead pop stars are commemorated on record. It only happens to some. There were lots of records made about Eddie Cochran, for instance, but not that many about Jimi Hendrix or Janis Joplin. Just lately, there seems to have been an unusual outpouring of new songs paying tribute to the life of a singer and guitarist whose death on April the 23rd, 1991, had been foreseen, anticipated even, for years previously. Johnny Thunders. Vic Goddard's tribute to him, now playing, came out earlier this summer on Vic's new solo album. But as well as this, there have been tracks by The Replacements, Dogs D'Amour, Jane County, and Johnny's ex-guitar player Walter Lure. It seems strange to commemorate someone whose life, including the most sleazy aspects of it, was probably best commented on by his own songs, So Alone, You Can't Put Your Arms Around a Memory, Chinese Rocks, and so on. So who was Johnny Thunders, and why does his life, so haunted by death, still fascinate people? During the next half hour, I'll be trying to find out. Was born John Anthony Genzali in Queens, New York on July the 15th, 1952. His upbringing seems to be that of an archetypal New York street kid, familiar with the clout as well as the graffiti and slang of the neighborhood gang, conscious of style over content in pop music, hip too to the kind of stuff he found in his sister Marianne's record collection.
I loved Elvis, and there's 5 years difference between Johnny and I in age, and he used to listen to it all the time. At the age of 3, he had one of those toy guitars, and he would pick it up and play it and imitate Elvis.
Female vocal groups were big in the 60s when Johnny was growing up. The most over-the-top kitsch bunch of the lot were the Shangri-Las.
When I say I'm in love, you best believe I'm in love, L-U-V. Here comes my guy, walking down the street. Look how he walks to the dancing beat. Da-da-da, thick wavy hair, da-da-da, a little too long. All day long, he's singing a song. And when I see him in the street, my heart takes a leap and skips a beat. Gonna walk right up to him, give him a great big kiss. Mwah! Tell him that I love him.
Johnny's long-term relationship with England started early too. He seems to have visited London in 1969 purely to immerse himself in pop culture and see bands, over 60 in all. Johnny also was struck by one particular English rock star whose style he wanted to emulate.
Yeah, I liked Keith Richards a lot. He was one of my main influences, I guess.
Johnny Thunders' biographer, Nina Antonia, tells this story.
A friend of his that he'd shared a flat with told me that they went to a bar one night and Keith Richards was in there, and this was when Johnny was very young. And Johnny said, "There's Keith Richards. I want to be like Keith Richards when I'm old." And he actually kept Keith Richards' smoked down cigarette stub for quite a while.
Early in 1971, Johnny Genzali became Johnny Volume, joining a band called Actress, along with Arthur Kane, Billy Mercier and Rick Rivets, soon to be sacked in favour of Sylvain Sylvain. The vocalist from another band, the Vagabond Missionaries, was also persuaded to join, David Johansen. They changed the name of the band to the Dolls, then the New York Dolls, and by Christmas they were doing their first ever gig for a party at the Endicott Hotel.
Saw you just before the dawn, and all the other kids was just dragging along. I couldn't believe the way things seemed to be, remembering the things he used to say to me, like, you know, looking for a kiss.
In 7 months, the New York Dolls had a fashionable following, recommended viewing for the likes of Alice Cooper, David Bowie, Lou Reed and others. In the autumn, they played England, supporting Rod Stewart and the Faces at Wembley. Glenn Matlock was there.
I was a big Faces fan, and I went to see the Faces at Wembley, at the Empire Pool. And the bill was, the Pink Fairies were opening on the bill, the New York Dolls, and the Faces, and the New York Dolls were just like, I mean, what is this all about? It was like Sylvain on roller skates, and Thunders didn't have a spare guitar, and he broke this string right at the beginning of Frankenstein, and there was this big wait while the roadie had to go off and put a new guitar on and all that, and Thunders is parading up and down the stage, and they've got all this hair, and Hanson was like throwing beer in the audience. So they came on, and I thought, oh, well, we only done a few bars and we'll start again. And he goes, wow, bam, and breaks the string again, you know, and everybody's going, boo, get up, and all that kind of lot. But their kind of bravado, you know, was just like, piss off. And they just had a totally different attitude.
Well, something must have happened over Manhattan. Who could have spawned all the children this time? Could they ever expect such a Frankenstein? Such a Frankenstein?
Their English visit was curtailed when drummer Billy Mercia died in mysterious circumstances during or after a party. He was replaced by Jerry Nolan. The New York Dolls recorded 2 studio albums, the first eponymously entitled one produced by Todd Rundgren in '73, and Too Much Too Soon, produced by George Shadow Morton, ex-Svengali of the Shangri-Las, them again, in '74. Despite the notable names, neither did the group justice. Finding the right producer was to be a problem which dogged Thunders throughout his entire career. It was the Dolls' attitude which really captured people's imagination, live and on TV, where on November the 28th, 1973, they managed to infuriate Whispering Bob Harris, the presenter on BBC Two's Old Grey Whistle Test, who described them thus.
Mark Rock, the New York Dolls, one of the songs from their first album, that was called Jet Boy.
That TV appearance influenced a lot of British viewers who later participated in punk. But an even stronger connection was forged in '74 when Malcolm McLaren arrived in New York along with Vivienne Westwood. By this time, the Dolls had been dropped by their then record label, and Johnny and drummer Jerry Nolan were addicted to heroin. McLaren set out to do more than sort out the group members' medical problems, though. He had a whole fashion concept to launch upon the unsuspecting American public.
Malcolm had this thing that he thought we just had to dress good, and he didn't really care about the music so much, I think, basically. And, you know, we played good. And, I don't know, it was just, we never hit it off together. He was English, we were American. We would see apart.
The McLaren episode ended in inevitable disaster. The Dolls split on the tour of the southern states. Johnny and Jerry Nolan went north to form the Heartbreakers.
Malcolm convinced the boys to stay in Florida and keep touring and playing the old stuff. And me and Jerry wanted to go back, write a few more songs, and have a whole new set and come out fresh. But, we couldn't agree on that, so me and Jerry split back to New York and called up Richard Hell and started the Heartbreakers.
Together with Walter Lure and Richard Hell, soon replaced by Billy Rath, the Heartbreakers were a pivotal band on the punk scene in New York and soon after England, where McLaren brought them in 1976 to support his new protégés, the Sex Pistols, on something called the Anarchy Tour.
Very first time I met Johnny was in the Roxy in Holston, which isn't there anymore, and we was rehearsing for the Anarchy Tour. They'd literally flown in that morning and gone straight to this theatre, and they played their set as the Heartbreakers. Everybody had heard about the Heartbreakers, but nobody had seen them. It really blew me away. They were so good. I mean, they was different from the whole punk thing. They were really like cocksure, and they looked great, and they had a whole different kind of cool. And they finished their set and came down and sat next to us and introduced themselves. And I got chatting to Johnny, but we didn't speak that much at that time because that was the day we went off to do the Bill Grundy show. We got a phone call through, so he was whipped out of there.
The tour collapsed in a welter of press hysteria, but the Heartbreakers stayed in England. By March 1977, they were touring in their own right.
Yeah, I'm here, baby, I'm here. All right. Our next tune is called Get Off the Phone.
The title of the Heartbreakers LP, LAMF, was a deliberate reference to the New York gang graffiti Johnny had grown up with. It contains some of Johnny Thunder's most well-known songs in years to come. But just like in the old days with the New York Dolls, the final product wasn't to everyone's satisfaction. Alan Houser from Jungle Records, who now own the rights to the material, reveals that the problem went further than just mixes.
When they recorded it, they put down the basic backing tracks pretty quickly, 2 or 3 days, I think. Then they went into the studio to mix it, and they went into Ramport Studio for a couple of weeks, doing one song on a whole day. Decided they didn't like it, went into Advision Studios, decided they didn't like it, went into Essex Studios, went into all sorts of studios. The record company at the time, Track Records, who used to look after The Who and bits of Jimi Hendrix and Mark Bolan, they had a long history, were at the time in severe financial difficulty and probably trying to stave off going bankrupt, probably not noticing what the Heartbreakers were doing. Eventually, the tapes came out. Jerry Nolan left the band because of the mixes that came out. Everyone in the band disowned the mixes. No one knows whose mixes they were that came out, but everyone was unanimous that they were no good. So then when we met up with Johnny in '83, we arranged for him to remix the album together with Tony James from Generation X, Sisters of Mercy, City Hispanic.
Dissatisfaction within the Heartbreakers led to the band breaking up by the end of the year, leaving Johnny Thunders to fend for himself in London. He took to playing with ad hoc lineups under names like The Living Dead and Johnny Thunders Rebels. Nicky Sudden was there.
Johnny resurfaced playing at the Speakeasy every Saturday night with a band called The Living Dead, who was made up of whoever was around. Like one night with Steve Jones on guitar, Sid Vicious on bass, then Peter Perrett would get up, John Perry, all the only ones were playing. Mike Kelly was playing drums, the drummer from Eddie and the Hot Rods was playing, Paul Cook was playing. You just go along every Saturday and it'd be just this brilliant band with Thunders. And you go along to Speak any other night and like you'd be sitting at the bar like 2 o'clock in the morning and suddenly you hear this guitar playing on stage and you look over and Johnny got up with whatever band was playing, even bands like Slack Alice and people like that. Thunders took over the whole thing. And then Johnny made with that lineup, Johnny made his solo album, which most people see as the best thing he ever did.
Doesn't pay to try. All the
smart boys know why. It doesn't mean I didn't try. I just never know why. Difficult all alone. Baby, you're not at home. And when I'm home, big deal, I'm still alone. It's a restless island. Beat my head against the pole. Try to knock some sense down in my bones. And even though they don't show, the scars are so old. And when they go, they let you know. You can't put your arm around a memory. You can't put your arm around a memory. You can't put your arm around a memory. Don't try. Don't try.
But nothing worked out for long. The English new wave scene was changing. Johnny couldn't get a record deal. He returned to the States, working for a while with the ex-guitarist of the legendary MC5, Wayne Kramer, from his home base of Detroit. But by 1982, Johnny was back in New York, broke. A new manager, Christopher Geeker, got Thunders out of his rut and over to Europe again, causing scandal during a Swedish tour beset by problems, mostly deriving from Johnny's drug habits. By the mid-80s, Johnny was gigging fairly regularly. There was a Heartbreakers reunion in '84. Then the following year, Johnny began to collaborate with Patti Paladin on a long-running project which eventually became the Copycats album, a collection of favourite 50s and 60s numbers.
Patty, I'm feeling really hungry.
Yeah, me too, Johnny. What do you feel like having?
I'm in the mood for some crawfish.
Crawfish? What's that?
You never heard of crawfish?
No. What's that?
It's something like this.
It was really good during the working of that. We had a lot of laughs, and there were some really funny moments. And of course, between the two of us, it's surprising that people who ran that record company didn't leave off a tall building. It drove them absolutely insane. And the budget escalated enormously for reasons like sampling castanets. I had like a flamenco dancer come in and play. It was just things like that. Which, what are you talking about? You're out of your mind. I did Spectatrack, which, bordered on being, involved in there, and at the end of it, it was like, no, this has got to go in, and all the instrumentation had to be genuine, and, it was all of that.
Now take Mr. Crawfish right in your hand.
The album reflected Johnny and Patti's New York upbringing, but tracks like Crawfish and Alligator Wine also pointed towards New Orleans, a place Johnny frequently said he wanted to go one day to form a band. It said he was also attracted to the idea of a New Orleans funeral. By the time the Copycats album came out, so had Nina Antonia's book. What did she think of him?
I think that Johnny was two people. I think he was Johnny Thunders, the, killer outlaw rock and roll guitarist, but I also think that he was a shy man with basically a good heart that was battling with his personal problems. And they were two very distinct characters. You could be sitting alone with Johnny somewhere and, talking about like what you'd seen on TV or shopping or good recipes and stuff like that. And then somebody, from another band would walk in and it'd suddenly become this Johnny Thunders person who was, sharper and wilder and more heavy-lidded. He would change and you would see the change.
But Johnny was, above all, a performer, a believer in putting on a show.
It's an attitude. It's exactly what it is to me, rock and roll, an attitude. Nothing more, nothing less. I could care less about being technical. I mean, I like somebody to, hit the note when they're supposed to hit the note, but, that's about as far as it goes. I don't care if somebody can play, 800 triplets in 3 seconds. Doesn't make a difference to me. Because it's boring anyway.
By the late 80s, Johnny was close to being in good shape, almost a changed man, according to many reports. Some of his late material, performed live but never recorded in a studio, was reputed to be his finest. Johnny's road manager during this time was Mick Webster.
He started writing different kinds of songs. He got interested in people a lot more, and he was worried about the kids that actually supported him. He actually said one day, he was worried about them, concerned. And he said he owed a lot to them. So he wanted to write some songs for them. So he started writing songs about the homeless. He lived all of those songs. They weren't songs that he made up. Every song that he ever wrote, he'd lived it. And the places that he wrote about, he'd been there. He'd seen a lot of life. More than anybody I'll ever see, I'm sure. He'd seen cities all over the world, and he never went to the nice areas. It was always the really heavy, kind of sleazy areas.
My past involves my future. My future I have planned. If I lose myself, I lose what's precious. And if there's not something wrong with me, there should be. Your society makes me sad.
By early 1991, Johnny was regularly crossing the Atlantic to play Paris, to visit London, to return to New York, and eventually to Japan. Then a visit to Germany came up to record with Die Totenhosen, the punk band whose name means the Dead Trousers.
Well, that's the way it goes.
Just done a lot of touring. We toured Japan, we've been to Thailand, we've been to America, and then we hooked up here in the UK and flew out to Germany. Did a couple of shows there, recorded with Totenhosen. So he was pretty exhausted. He was really driven to get to New Orleans. And we were trying to get a flight, we couldn't get a flight to New Orleans. And at the airport, well, he seemed really calm. Although he was so desperate to get there, he was still really calm about everything. And the funny thing is, the first time I ever met him, we shook hands. When I walked into the gate, it seemed really important to get him on that flight. And as we got to the gate, we shook hands again. So the first time we ever met, and the last time we ever met, we shook hands. And he gave me this postcard of Elvis Presley. And it said, "Dear Mick, please take care of yourself. Your friend JT." And I must admit, I felt really uncomfortable after that, all the way back to England. Later on that night, I got the phone call.
Johnny arrived in New Orleans on April the 22nd. He checked into his accommodation, room 37, St. Peter's Guest House, where the following morning he was found dead.
I spoke to him the night before he died, and he was very happy. He was moving to New Orleans. My son was going to bring down his stuff. For this to happen, it just didn't add up. His passport was stolen, money was stolen, a lot of things. And I was getting nothing but negative reports from New Orleans. They weren't cooperating with me. They were being very nasty. They'd hang up on me. The autopsy report just doesn't reveal things that should be in there that aren't. I just came back from New Orleans about 2 weeks ago, and we're still having some investigations being done now. I can't really reveal too much about it now because it may hurt the investigation. But from what we could see right now, there was a lot of foul play in Johnny's death. And hopefully, we'll find out the truth.
The mystery lingers on. This year, a film documentary, Johnny's Gone to Heaven, the last rock and roll movie, is nearing completion. And an album of Johnny's unrecorded songs is being put together, featuring members of Los Lobos, the New York Dolls, Mink DeVille, Wayne Kramer, Hanoi Rocks, and others. Plenty of people remember Johnny Thunders, that's for sure.
call back, okay?
Thanks to Annie Nightingale for that report into Johnny Thunder's life and demise, produced, like the rest of the show, by Bob Dickinson. Thanks also to Nina Antonia, Marianne Bracken, Alan Hauser, Vic Goddard, Glenn Matlock, Patty Paladin, Nicky Sudden and Mick Webster. On next week's guest list, another special report is about ambient...